Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in to this event. This evening, I'll be interviewing Walter Isaacson. Walter is an American journalist and author. He's also a professor at Tulane University. He's authored many famous biographies, including that of Einstein and Steve Jobs. He's also been the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, as well as the chair and CEO of CNN and editor of The Time. Walter's done a lot of incredible things throughout his journey so far, and it's an incredible honor to be interviewing him here today. Before I hand over to Walter to say a couple of words, just to let everyone watching on the Zoom know that there is a Q&A function. So if you have any questions for Walter as we're going along, please feel free to put them in and we can ask them to him at the end. So over to you, Walter.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's great to be back at the Oxford Union. In your bio, you left out the most important thing in my background, which is I was very much a part of the Oxford Union. I loved the debate hall. I loved the conversations. And I think above all, I loved the bar, which I hope is still as good as it was when I was there. In fact, I got my start in politics. It's somewhat poignant and sad now, but I helped run Benazir Bhutto's campaign to be a member, to be the president of the Oxford Union. This is 45 years ago or so. And I think what I learned at the Oxford Union was the importance of listening and the importance of being able to understand all sides, not just either side, but all sides of a possible debate. What I've done over the course of my career since then, besides be it Time Magazine and CNN and the Aspen Institute, is I try to write biographies about really smart people, whether it's been Franklin, Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, now Jennifer Doudna, the person who won the Nobel Prize for gene editing. But even coming out of Oxford, I learned something. Perhaps I learned it at the Union, which is there are a lot of smart people in this world. And smart people are a dime a dozen. And at a certain point, you realize they don't really amount to much. They didn't amount to much in the Oxford Union. What mattered was creative, wise, innovative people who were not just smart, but knew how to deal with other people, knew how to collaborate, and knew how to be creative, to think out of the box. And so in each of my books, I try to do somebody who, as Steve Jobs famously said, knew how to think different. And one of the things we learn, both from debates and hopefully at university, is how to challenge not only other people's assumptions, but our own assumptions. We've gone through three great revolutions in terms of science and technology in the modern period, since I was around, since I became around. And the first was the first half of the 20th century. First half of the 20th century was a revolution driven by physics. It was driven by the great discoveries that Einstein made in his miracle year of 1905. And it led to things like the atom bomb and space travel and GPS and semiconductors. The next great revolution started in the 1950s, the second half of the 20th century. And that's when the internet, the microchip, and the computer all were invented. They were invented separately. You know, the computer invented in Bletchley Park, not too far from Oxford, not as part of a network and not as part of a microchip or transistor, but all invented separately. But when you combine the computer, the microchip, and the network, you get the digital revolution. I wrote my latest book, The Code Breaker, because I think we're now in the third great revolution of modern times, and that's a genetic revolution in which molecules are becoming the new microchip. We're going to have to reprogram not just microchips, but reprogram our molecules. And we're going to have to know not just the binary code, but the four-letter genetic codes of RNA and DNA. I started writing this book thinking nobody's going to even know what RNA is. But early on, COVID struck. And whether it be Sarah Gilbert and others at Oxford, or the people at BioNTech in Germany, or the people at Pfizer and Moderna in Cambridge, Mass, they realized that RNA was going to be a messenger that they could reprogram to tell our cells to build a protein that would give us immunity to this coronavirus. It also will be a great moral issue, something that we will be debating, I hope, at the Oxford Union, which is when we use this new genetic engineering technology, how far should we go? You know, we're going to want to use this new genetic engineering technology to edit our own genes. And we'll do it in ways that I think most people, that most people will feel are useful, like we've just done it to cure sickle cell anemia. We'll use it to cure very bad genetic diseases. But what happens next? What happens when we can make designer babies? We can make our kids taller, or make our kids smarter, or make our kids have different hair color or eye color, or whatever we want. We might be able to determine whether they'll be predisposed to being depressed, those type of things. Should we let every parent just design their children however the parent sees fit? Should it be left to the free market? And if these enhancements that we'll be able to make at the genetic supermarket aren't free, and they won't be, are we okay with the rich being able to buy better genes for their children than the poor? Are we worried that this new technology will end up editing the diversity out of our society? I live in New Orleans. I can look out of my window and see the great variety of our species, people large and tall and fat and skinny and black and white and Creole and straight and gay and trans. Some I saw this morning who sign language that are deaf. Do we want to make sure that all of that diversity remains in our species? These are the moral questions we're going to have to face in this new revolution, the revolution of genetic editing. Julian Savaskew, many others at Oxford, are in the forefront of being moral philosophers on this. When I went to Oxford, my primary field was moral philosophy. And it takes all the tools I learned at Oxford in moral philosophy just to begin to frame the questions, not the answers, of what we're going to do in this new revolution. So with that, Rachel, I hope I've set it up a little bit, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Walter. I think that was a really great introduction to some of the things you've been working on, but also some of the really big questions that are present in today's society, and some of the things that we as students and as people should all be thinking about, and where society is going in the future. I noticed one thing you mentioned at the start was, being part of Oxford, the Oxford Union. So I wanted to ask, how was your experience of being a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford? How did that influence your way of life? And do you think that there was some value to having the experience of both the capitalist institutions, but also the cultures here in the UK, but also where you are in America?
A couple of things that the Rhodes Scholarship did for me. First of all, it gave me a period to just study a broad array of topics. As I said, philosophy, economics, political science, and to read the great philosophers. I think one of the things that is true of my life is that some of the great people in this world and some of the smartest people are specialists. They drill down in a particular topic. I like to look at a cross-section of topics and how they relate. And the people I've written about tend to be people who have one foot in the humanities and one foot in the sciences. They care both about engineering and the liberal arts. Steve Jobs, whenever he launched a new product, he would end the product presentation with street signs showing the intersection of the liberal arts and technology. That's what I learned at Oxford, was to take a broad view of the world so that I could, see the patterns across nature. By being able to study science at Oxford, as well as philosophy, and then the philosophy of science, I think it helped me understand not just the facts of science and the theories of science, but also the social implications of science. I made a point when I went to Oxford, this will get me in trouble, at Rhodes House, but I didn't hang around Rhodes House. I didn't hang around fellow Americans. I was at Pembroke, which is just the most gorgeous and magical of all colleges. There weren't that many Americans there. I rode lightweight crew. And I also just made a wide variety of friends. And because I was an outsider, I could make friends. You may be too young to remember, but the social class system in England was pretty rigid. People, from the more wealthier classes and the working classes, they didn't fraternize as much. But I didn't notice those social distinctions when I first came. And I had a broad array of friends, both at Pembroke College and some of the other places at Oxford.
That sounds like a really great and amazing experience. You mentioned a bit about science and also technology, such as genetic engineering. Do you think that society can keep up with all of the technological innovations we're seeing? And are they responsible for maybe an increase in populism or an increase in marginalization in the communities? And if so, what do you think we can practically do to kind of keep technology and science in check and not just let it run away?
It's a good question, Rachel, and it's why I tend to write the books I do or be involved in the Aspen Institute and other things, because I think there were those of us who, Oxford is a epicenter of it. So is Davos, so is the Aspen Institute. People who believe in technology and believe in globalization, and they believe that technological change will help make society better, and that free trade will do so, and that robotics will do so. And I know a lot of people are studying that at Oxford. And we all came away believing what I'll call the Oxford Davos Aspen dogma of the glories of technology and the disruptions that it brings. I think we were not sensitive enough to the fact that, yes, there are great benefits that come from technological change, but certain people get left out, certain people get marginalized, certain people don't benefit from the expanded pie that comes from technology. And whether that helps create a sentiment for Brexit or for authoritarian rule in Hungary or for Trumpism in the United States, that populist backlash against globalism, free trade, technology, and automation is something that I personally was not sensitive enough to until maybe 10 years ago when I began to feel the backlash happening.
Thank you, thanks. And I think, would you say that as a society, we kind of need to develop to become more sensitive to these issues? Or what can we do to kind of make sure that, as a society, we are, I guess, being sensitive, like you said?
Well, it's one of the reasons I think that democracy, despite all of its challenges, is by far the best system, because when we, and I don't quite know who you mean by we, but if I take it what you mean by we as those of us who are leaders of a particular society or country, if, quote, we are not very sensitive to the dislocations and disenchantments and resentments, then suddenly there's going to be referenda, or suddenly there's going to be new elections. And so we've seen how democracy is facing a lot of challenges these days. But to me, that's all the more reason to have a democracy, and to have it so that we're not run by a technocratic elite that goes from the Oxford Union to the West Wing of the White House, but instead we can be harnessed, we can be guarded, we can be overruled, we can be overthrown. When the people get fed up with a prevailing dogma, even if people like myself think the dogma, such as free trade, or the dogma, such as the benefits of technology, is correct.
Great. And I think another question kind of still on this issue is, for young people, especially, those from poorer backgrounds, do you feel like it's harder for them as innovators to be successful because of the lack of capital open to them? I feel like a lot of investment, it's really hard for young people to, I guess, get in on it and, make a difference through those ways.
One of the things that I've done in New Orleans when I came back to live in my hometown was get involved with my wife in a group called Idea Village. An Idea Village is a place where people come to pitch ideas. And we try to make it very easy for people from all backgrounds, all walks of life. People who have bank accounts and people who don't have bank accounts. People who have, uncles that'll lend them some money and people who don't. And we try to say, okay, we're going to raise a fund of money so that all people with all ideas have an equal chance. I think the greatest barrier to becoming an entrepreneur is that it takes a lot of risk, and people from privileged backgrounds are able to take risks better than people who don't have privileged backgrounds. They also have more money that they can put at risk than others. I also, though, think that sometimes it's not just money or race or socioeconomic status that limits you. There are certain places in which there's a hunger for innovation. I wrote about one of the greatest Oxford innovators of the digital age in a book called The Innovators, and that's Tim Berners-Lee. I'm sure most of your members know Sir Tim, and he was a person who developed the World Wide Web. When he was at Oxford, it was the exact same time that Steve Jobs was, 1974. I was just coming up to Oxford. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were young and in Silicon Valley and dropping out of college. And Tim Berners-Lee was starting to think about the web. With all due respect to Oxford back then, it was not an incubator of venture and risk. The university did not encourage people to start businesses. And unlike Silicon Valley out in California, where there was the Homebrew Computer Club, but there were also venture capitalists visiting the Homebrew Computer Company and giving checks to people as investments when they had good ideas. So I think we have to do many things. We have to make sure that the marginalized and the less privileged are included whenever there are startups and ecosystems to be had, that they have an access to capital that is at least somewhat similar to what other people do. But also we have to find out how to make places, not just Silicon Valley or, London, engines of innovation, but make it so that everywhere there can be communities that help young people with startup ideas figure out how to finance them.
Thank you. I know you've spoken about startups and how they compare to, Silicon Valley and these big companies. I think a lot of people would agree that in today's world, the tech industry is very much monopolized in a way. So do you think that, to what extent is it that digital innovation in general and this creativity is harder in today's society when it's only the big tech companies that have a really big stake in the game?
I think that's a huge problem. And I think the network effects tends to allow companies that are big to get bigger. If Facebook is big, it's going to get bigger because people want to be on a social network with other people. And whether that's Amazon or Google search or social networks, there tends to be a concentration of power. And that tends to be very bad for innovation. I mean, the people at Google defend their almost monopoly when it comes to search. But I remind them that back right when I came out of Oxford, Microsoft had somewhat of a monopoly on the operating system on the desktop. And they tried to leverage that monopoly to embed their search engine and their browser, their web browser into it, killing Netscape and killing new search engines. The Justice Department here in the United States stepped in with Antitrust. It was a complicated case. I teach it at Tulane. Meaning complicated is that it didn't have an easy, clean resolution. They won in parts and lost in parts. But the main thing that happened was that Microsoft was restrained from being able to crush competition by embedding into their own operating system competing products such as Netscape or Google. And likewise, we need to have more antitrust enforcement today. I think Europe is leading the way. I hope Great Britain also gets in the game there. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there. But certainly when you have Amazon being able to control the marketplace and then favor as it wants its own products, and certainly Facebook dominating its marketplace, When my kids at Tulane have a good idea for a new product, and when they go to Idea Village, that incubator I told you about we have here, and they pitch a new product, whether it's an app for rating beers or making your dogs go on dates or something more significant, one of the first questions a venture capitalist is going to ask is, if your idea turns out to be a good one, how is Facebook going to kill you? How is Google going to crush you? And so we have to make sure that Facebook and Google can't crush new ideas that come along. That requires more antitrust enforcement. We're seeing it happen in the past few months in the United States. President Biden has appointed Lena Khan, who's very much in favor of strict antitrust enforcement to the FTC. And importantly, the standard was for the past 20 or 30 years is the lack of competition costing consumers. And the consumer harm was measured only by, did it cost them more money? And Facebook and Google can argue, hey, no harm, we're free. So we don't fall under the antitrust thing. But antitrust law historically has been and should be, not only does it harm consumers in terms of pricing, but also does it harm potential competitors? Because in the long run, if you kill competitors, it may be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you've harmed consumers and you've harmed your economy.
Thanks. So you mentioned antitrust and the laws surrounding that. How would you say the attempt to kind of enforce this is going? Because I know there's been a lot of cases where these big corporations have been able to hire whole legal teams that have found loopholes for them. So if this keeps on happening, do we still have faith in these antitrust systems in place? And do we still think that they can protect our interests as consumers and, for society as a whole?
Oh, yeah. And I think we're seeing it happen already in Europe. The European antitrust enforcement's a little bit stronger, and I'll say ahead of what the United States is. But you've seen it modify the behavior of Google and its search and its maps and its need to have its platforms be open to competitors. I do think that you did not see that here in the United States for the past, 4 or 5 years. But I think the Biden administration is very, very vigorous in having filed antitrust cases. So have some of the state's attorney general. One of the great things about this in the United States at the moment is that, unlike most other things here, it hasn't become a partisan issue. There are Republicans such as Josh Hawley and Democrats such as Amy Klobuchar who are working together to have new antitrust regulation. And maybe it will fail. Maybe these cases will all fail. Maybe the laws won't pass. But at the moment, you have so many cases about to go to court and so many laws being considered that even without them being successful yet, it's restraining the behavior of some of these big companies, so that a few years ago, Facebook could buy WhatsApp or they could buy Instagram and they could put others out of business. But now you see them being restrained. They know that there'd be no way they could buy Snap or other products. So just the threat of antitrust is already having some impact. I think if the government loses all of its cases and no laws are passed, your pessimism may be justified. But so far, it looks like both Europe and the European Union and the United States are doing a whole lot on antitrust.
Thanks, Walter. I'm glad to hear that we can, have hope for the future on this issue. I think obviously you're very accomplished, and it would be great to hear a bit more about your career and your journey, because I think it really has been a journey for you in terms of all the things you've done. I know you started off with journalism in the Sunday Times, and then went on to become the CEO and chairman of CNN, one of the biggest media institutions we have, during the events of 9/11, a great catastrophe, and a time where there was obviously a lot going on globally. So I just wanted to ask, firstly, what kind of sparked your interest in journalism and led you to get involved in the Sunday Times initially?
I got a job at the Sunday Times when I was about 16 or 17 from the late, great Harry Evans. I was just an intern and I had worked at my local newspaper, the Times-Picayune of New Orleans, and I sent him a bunch of clips and he said, fine, come be a copy boy, intern, copy clerk. And so I came to the Sunday Times of London even before I came to Oxford and worked in the walk up to Watergate in the 72, 73, 74. And it gave me a wonderful taste for journalism. At Oxford, I thought about becoming an academic. You know, I had a master's. I was doing a B.Phil and an M.Phil. But the journalism bug bit me. And so I went back to New Orleans, worked on the paper here, and got recruited by Time magazine. I love being at Time because it went back to that notion of being interested in a wide variety of things. It was a general interest magazine. So one week I could be writing in the music section. The next week I'd be writing medicine. One week I could be writing foreign affairs. The next week I'd be writing, business or cinema. So I got to enjoy everything. One of the frustrations at Time is you only came out once a week and you had to hold everything to 1, 2, 3 pages. So I said, well, why don't we write books? And I got one of my best friends, Evan Thomas, and we decided to write a book about an obscure group of people called we called them the Wise Men, who helped create foreign policy after World War II. Oddly enough, the book was successful, and I realized, well, that was a side course I could take as well. I could stay in journalism in the day and write books in the evening. And so one book led to another. After The Wise Men, which ends in the beginning of the Vietnam War, I said, well, I wanted to do Henry Kissinger so I could look at the Vietnam period. And after doing Henry Kissinger and dealing with him, which was something, I said, oh, man, I'm going to do somebody who's been dead for 200 years. So I went back and did Ben Franklin, partly because Kissinger was a great balance of power diplomat. And I was trying to say, what are the roots of that? And when Franklin was in Paris trying to get the French in on our side of the revolution, he did a great balance of power game with the Bourbon Pact nations. He also turned out to be a great scientist, which I didn't know. We think of him as a doddering old guy flying a kite in the rain, but those electricity experiments were huge. So after I did him, I decided, hey, I want to do a scientist to demystify science. I did Einstein. And it went on and on. After I did Franklin and Einstein, Steve Jobs called me up and said, do me next. And my first reaction is, yeah, you arrogant, kid, you're my age. Let's wait until you retire. But then I found out he had cancer and, I decided I had to take the opportunity to do him. So as I said, each thing leads to another. I don't think I set out leaving Oxford. I think I set out leaving Oxford thinking I'd go back to Harvard and be an academic philosopher. But then I took a break and worked at the newspaper again. And I don't think there was ever a moment I said, well, here's what my career is going to be like. I sometimes think even though I'm in my late 60s, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I don't set out a career plan.
That's definitely very interesting, Walter. I know you mentioned the Steve Jobs biography, which you did, which is obviously an international bestseller and an award-winning piece for you. I know that was obviously a long process in terms of that. You had to conduct several interviews, you had to do a lot of research. How did you find that process and the fact that, it was so drawn out in terms of having to contact several different people?
I think the main thing was figuring out how to deal with Steve Jobs himself. It was a difficult thing. He was a genius. He was mesmerizing and magnetic and charismatic. I got sucked into what they called his reality distortion field because you wanted to believe anything he said. But I also knew he was a jerk, or they have a technical term in Silicon Valley that begins with an A, and he was one of those. And so I had to spend a whole lot of time with him, deal with his rough side, and then to make it all the more difficult, he was dying. And so I spent a lot of time sitting next to his bed where he could hardly move when he was going through bad patches of his illness. So that to me was a grueling process. One of the things I do as a historian is I'm able to mix the archival work done by great historians, meaning going back into the documents, the letters, the memos, the archives, with the ability to pick up the phone, call people, go visit them, door knock, that a journalist has. And there's certainly much better historians at going through primary archival material than I. And there are probably people like Bob Woodward who are better door knocking journalists. But I think I'm one of the few people who tries to do both. And I got to do that with Steve Jobs. I got to do that with Einstein. Even with Leonardo da Vinci, who's been dead 500 years, I got to spend a lot of time traveling around, interviewing people, talking to curators, scientists who had dealt with some of his experiments. So I always try to do a blend of interviewing a lot of people, but also doing archival research.
I think that's a very unique approach to biography writing, but obviously one that's been very successful since your biographies are very gripping and have been very successful worldwide. I know we mentioned before that you obviously were chairman and CEO of CNN. I was wondering what were some of the challenges you had to overcome during your time leading CNN, if you'd like to share.
Well, when I first went to CNN, it was early, yes, 2000, it was 2001, and there was no news happening. We were covering shark attacks and O.J. Simpson, arrests. And I was thinking, okay, how are we going to survive in a period when there's no news? And shortly after I got there, September 11th happened. The World Trade Center was hit by the planes. The Gulf War comes to pass. And so that was huge. And that was not much of a challenge because in a time of crisis, we knew what to do. I knew what to do as a journalist, and so did the people at CNN. Our instincts kicked in. The challenge came when the war wound down at around 2003, and there was a rise of partisan journalism, meaning Fox News on the right, run by Murdoch, and a more liberal or progressive or left-wing network, MSNBC, on our left. And journalism became very partisan and polarized. And something happened in the digital age, not just with cable TV, but also with talk radio, the blogosphere, and social media, which is people got more viewership and better ratings, the more incendiary they were, the more they played to people's resentments, the more they angered people, the more that they got people on who shouted. That's not my style. My style is the style of the Oxford Union, in which, yes, people disagree, but they do it civilly, and they do it with one ear at least, maybe two ears at best, open to what the other side is saying. And so my greatest challenge, and I ended up just leaving CNN when my contract was over and going to the Aspen Institute, which tries to foster open-minded discussions. My biggest challenge at CNN was the media and our politics and our society were becoming partisan, polarized, ideological, and poisoned. And I was not made to operate in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I think you mentioned partisan journalists. That's obviously an issue that is still faced today in today's society. A lot of people think, this newspaper's right wing, this one's left wing. What do you think can really be done to make sure that everyone's been given accurate information that's not tainted by someone's political beliefs or the newspaper's relationship to a specific party?
Yeah, when Ben Franklin came to Philadelphia in the 1750s or so, maybe, there were about 10 newspapers, and he started an 11th, and the papers were all very partisan. There were those who were in favor of the crown in England, or the proprietors, or the Anglicans, or for that matter, were for the side of revolution. But I grew up at a period in which journalism tried to take a broader approach and tried to aim, most journalists, at being objective and fair. Most of the time we didn't hit the target exactly, but at least we knew in our heart that's what you were supposed to do in journalism. Well, that changed for a variety of reasons, one of which was technological. As I said, if you have 500 places you can go in the blogosphere, and 500 feeds you could, subscribe to on streaming or Twitter, or 500 places on the talk radio dial, or 500 channels on cable you could go to, then the people who shout the most are able to get the more fervent audience. I think there are a couple of fixes, one of which is that we created a law here, and to some extent it exists in Europe, which is if you're a publisher of information and you publish something that's knowingly untrue and it hurts people, you're liable for it. You can get sued. And that, is a restraint to make sure you check your facts and try to get it right. But if you're a platform, as they call it, such as Facebook, or nowadays we have the controversy on Spotify, which means you're not being a publisher, you say, you're simply offering a place where other people can post whatever they want. People can post whatever they want on Facebook, whatever they want to say on Twitter, and maybe they can put their podcasts on Spotify or put their videos up on YouTube. The law says that if you're YouTube or Spotify or I'm not sure about Spotify, but if you're YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, you're just a platform. You don't have to take responsibility. You can't be sued if somebody posts something that's libelous or incorrect. Well, I understand that, because you can't have Facebook looking at every single post and checking it. But we need to find some balance. We've gotten that out of whack. Facebook should be held responsible for when it spreads misinformation, libel, bullying, lies, dangerous things. They should have some duty of care, and that if they are reckless in allowing these things to spread, I think people should be able to sue Facebook, and I think they should not have immunity. So there are a lot of things we can do. And the other thing, frankly, is I got rid of my TV set. I figure if I don't watch cable TV, I'm going to be less riled up. I can watch things online, I can read, but all of us have to be a little bit careful every day before we hit, post on a Facebook or a Twitter feed to say, am I being divisive? Am I trying to just stir things up? Or am I being useful? And in some ways, the media we get reflects who we are as a people. And so we got to improve ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I definitely get what you're saying about improving ourselves. I think a lot of people find it difficult in this day and age when we're, I guess, completely immersed in technology and completely surrounded by it. But I think just to continue, I know when you did eventually leave CNN, you then became president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. I know this is an organization that is very important to you, a policy studies organization. So I just wanted you to tell us a bit more about what led you to join the Aspen Institute, and if you feel like you have, I guess, achieved the goals you wanted to achieve through your time there.
Well, as I said, at CNN, I got very frustrated by the fact that things were getting so partisan, that I could get better ratings by putting on a right-wing or left-wing shouting talk show personality than by having a reporter based in Baghdad or in Syria. And so I wanted to go a place where I could try to be part of the solution and not continue to be in a industry that was part of the problem. And what Aspen Institute does is bring together people from the left and the right, and the Democrats and Republicans, and say, how can we fix certain problems based on a common set of values? And I just wanted to do that because you asked, how are we going to get out of this mess? Or how, is this ever going to improve? I think it improves if each of us says, well, what can I do in life to make this a little bit better? And that's what the Aspen Institute did. I loved it. We put on the Aspen Ideas Festival. It was like counter programming to Davos, where all sorts of people thought they knew what was best for the world, went to Davos. But if they were asking questions and trying to figure out together what we could do. That's what Aspen was about. And I think I stayed there, I don't know, I was going to stay there 7 years. I think 7 years is a good term for any job. I think I stayed there like 15, 16 years. So I don't know if I accomplished things. Certainly the world got worse just as I was leaving. When I left right before Donald Trump was elected. I left right before Brexit and right before Orban in Hungary. So I don't think we fixed the world. But I did feel that it was an institute that had its values in the right place.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that obviously not one thing can fix the world, but I think, do you feel like the culture that was developed through the institute, the culture of, like you said, people coming together, this sort of conversation and mediation on issues, do you think this has been something that has been carried forward in today's society and more recently, or do you feel like there is more kind of partisanship in society and people are less willing to interact with those with different beliefs?
I think there's become more partisanship and more polarized and more poisoned. I remember when Barack Obama, talking to him when he was in Aspen, they said the fever will break. People are sick of all this poison and chatter. And I thought he was right, but he wasn't. The fever hasn't broken. And I thought the fever would break when Joe Biden got elected. Biden also was somebody who spent a lot of time in Aspen at the Institute. And I thought, okay, he's pretty much somebody who can work with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans. He's somebody who was elected not to make sweeping changes in our society, but instead to reduce the partisanship and to make our politics less poisonous. But so far, that has not been the case. So I do think there's always a possibility. I hope someday there'll be politicians that run on the platform of we're better than this. We can come together. I have a young person is running for Senate in the state of Louisiana, and that's his platform, which is we don't have to be as bitter and nasty as our current senator. We can come together. And the question is, can you get 50% of the people to say, yeah, you're right, and vote for you on that platform? I think eventually people get so fed up and so sick of this situation that, yeah, you'll get a majority of people saying, okay, let's have normal, rational people again.
Yeah, definitely. And I know also, Walter, apart from your work with the Aspen Institute and CNN, you've done a lot of work on humanitarian causes, for example, helping to mitigate the disaster that was Hurricane Katrina, as well as a lot of other community work and boards that you've sat on. I just wanted to ask in general, what kind of, inspired you to get involved in these community action projects and really take the lead on these issues?
Well, I don't think you need to be inspired to do it. I think we all do it naturally. In fact, what happens sometimes is we're all naturally neighborly. We all naturally care about our city and our civic life and the people around us and our country and our communities. And then somehow we might lose that because we decide we care more about making money or we care more about, running a hedge fund that will be successful. But I don't think it's that hard to be what we naturally are, which is generally neighborly as people. I became involved early on at the very beginning with Teach for America. I just joined the board, and it sort of taught me how you can help organizations that have a good mission and what satisfaction comes from that. So after being on that board, I joined more other boards for civic life, including, as you said, the Louisiana Recovery Authority after Katrina. And I think, most of us realize that that's what makes life satisfying, especially if you've been successful enough to be able to pay the mortgage and send your kids to college and all. Then you say, it's not just about making money. When Steve Jobs was dying 11 years ago in the summer, I asked him what it all meant. And he said, I learned from my guru in India that life is like a river. There's wonderful things people have put in that river that if you're successful, you get to take out of the river, such as great products and great ideas, or maybe houses they built or whatever. He said, but now that I'm at this stage of my life, he was losing his battle to cancer. He said, I realize that what's important is not what you take out of the river, but what you put into the river. And I think most of us realize that at a certain point in life, that we're only here for a short period. So the satisfaction you get is from what you put into the river that other people are going to enjoy and make their lives better.
Thanks so much for that interesting answer, Walter. I think what would be great to do now, because I know we obviously have a lot of people watching this right now, I'm happy to take some audience questions from the Q&A. So, so the first question is a bit about your biography writing, which we spoke about earlier on in the interview. So someone asked, what kind of strategies do you use to really get to know these world-renowned figures at a deep and personal level?
I think you just have to spend a whole lot of time with the person and listen, not try to question them, not try to play gotcha, not, have a preconceived list of questions you're going to do. But I'm doing Elon Musk now. So I just go over to Boca Chica, Texas, where he's got his star base, or Austin, or sometimes, Los Angeles. He lived in many places. And I just hang around for day after day after day. And I'm lucky in life because having been at Time Magazine, having written successful biographies, I can get a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs or a Jennifer Doudna, who is the biochemist I wrote about last, and say, hey, I just want to be by your side. I want to be at your meetings. I want to have dinners with you. I want to listen to you. And I think anybody who wants to be a writer or a journalist, you'll be surprised how easy it is to get people to talk if it really seems like you want to listen. And I learned that my first days on the job at the Times-Picayune and then at the Sunday Times of London, where when I went on stories, I'd knock on people's doors and I wouldn't confront them. I'd just say, hey, I'm doing this story. Tell me about it. If you look like you really wanted to know the answer, people are really, really eager to talk.
Yeah, I'm guessing that must have also been a great personal experience for you, being able to, spend time with all of these people who are, I guess, key figures in today's society and being able to get to know them personally as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm very lucky. Sometimes it's not all fun and games. Being with Steve Jobs when he was in really bad moods or really sick, it wasn't all that much fun. But I wake up every morning with a sense of gratitude that almost every interesting person I can imagine, if I've really wanted to talk to them or listen to them or see them, I've probably had that opportunity because I've been a journalist, I've been a writer. I was a journalist in Gdansk, Poland, and Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, and in Moscow in 1989 at the end of the Cold War. And I didn't get to know Václav Havel, who led the revolution in Poland, or Václav Havel, who led the revolution in Czechoslovakia, as it was at the time, or Lech Wałęsa in Poland. But I got to be with them. I got to be there. I got to watch them. And so I think, I know I've been lucky, but I also think anybody who's open-minded and says, all right, I want to go listen and learn, you'll be able to get people to talk.
Great, thanks. And another question from the audience on this topic of the biographies you've written. So they've said that, you've written about these great innovators, essentially, who have lived in different times, and I guess from a variety of different fields, like you've explained. What would you say, I guess, are the commonalities and differences you see in all these great people that you've written about? And how do you think
the greatest commonality is curiosity? When I read Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, I saw all the questions he asked each week that he was curious about, like how do they walk on ice in Holland, or described the tongue of the woodpecker. I mean, who gets up in the morning and says, I need to know what a tongue of a woodpecker looks like? But it was that relentless curiosity. And Steve Jobs had that, and Einstein had it, and Jennifer Doudna did. And it was curiosity for its own sake. And we see that every day, every great innovation. I mean, CRISPR, the gene editing tool I wrote about, that was because a graduate student in Spain just became curious about why the genetic sequences in bacteria he was looking at kept repeating themselves. There was no reason he needed to know that. He didn't know there was going to be anything useful, but he was just curious, pure curious. And after years of study and other people study, they realized, well, that's how bacteria fight off viruses. Well, as we know from the era of COVID, learning how to fight off viruses actually can be useful. So I just think we all have to, and the good thing about curiosity is we all have it. It's not like Einstein, had a certain mental processing power that most of us are never going to have. We can have just as much curiosity as he did or Leonardo did. And so that's the one thing I would say, stick with the curiosity.
Thank you. And I'll take one more question from the audience submitted questions. And this is essentially about antitrust law, which we spoke about earlier. I think this person's trying to get at, what they're trying to get at is that they feel like the government, why should the government be allowed to, I guess, impose so much control over the market when they feel like they're not doing the same for the tech companies? So would you say that antitrust law is hypocritical in that sense?
No, I mean, I think antitrust law has a long history, and it is part and parcel of capitalism. I'm a believer in free markets, a believer in capitalism, but the essence of free markets is fair competition. And if you don't have fair competition, you're not going to have great choice for consumers. You're not going to have innovation. And so I think it's proper and just for a society based on the will of its people and the legislature and eventually the courts to say, we are going to have certain rules. We're going to let companies be very big. In the United States, there is no rule against having a monopoly. If you're Microsoft, if you're Amazon, if you're Google, if you create something that's so good, if you're Facebook, that everybody uses it, antitrust law doesn't say you can't have a monopoly. What it does say is that you can't leverage that monopoly. You can't use that monopoly in other fields to crush competition. In other words, if you have a dominance in the operating system, you can't use that to crush somebody trying to create a browser. If you have dominance in search, you can't use that to crush somebody who's trying to create Yelp or Expedia or some service that does travel. Now, you might say, what right does the government have to do that? I understand a very laissez-faire attitude, but even going back to the most laissez-faire of all thinkers, going back from John Locke to Keynes to Teddy Roosevelt to Brandeis or others, I think you have both the political decisions and the legal decisions that were jointly made that said, we are going to have a free market. We're going to try to let free enterprise do whatever it should in order to grow. But we are going to have certain rules of the road. We're going to say you can't pollute. We're going to say you can't crush competition in a different field by using your strength in another field. You can't hire child labor. So I understand this notion of why should government have the right to tell companies what to do? Well, the answer is because we as a society, hopefully thinking it through very carefully, say that will be good for our economy. It'll be good for competition. It'll be good for entrepreneurs who want to start things. It will give us more freedom, not less freedom, if we get to have more choice, if we get to have more competition. So go back to your basic principles, which is what we did at the Aspen Institute. What basic principles do you have? And among them are, in my case, not necessarily everybody else's, we like freedom, we like choice, we like competition, we like opportunity for everybody to succeed. We like economic growth and health so that we all have better lives. And if you say these are our guiding principles, then you can have a debate over how strong should antitrust laws be? How strong should child labor laws be? How high should tariffs be? All of these things are part of the political realm. They're part of the policy realm. But we should do as one does at Oxford and the Oxford Union, say, let's begin by saying, what is it we're trying to achieve here? What are our basic moral goals? I do that, and I get to the fact that, hey, I'm not in favor of crushing things on antitrust or whatever. I'm just saying we got to move the needle back a little bit to maybe what it was 20 years ago and make it so that free markets, free minds, free competition can thrive better than it does now in an era in which I think it's threatened.
Thank you so much, Walter. That was our last question for today, but it's been a true honor for me, and I'm sure all the members of the Oxford Union and those watching tonight, to get an insight from you into these issues, as well as hearing so much about your amazing career so far.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. And by the way, I'm there the first week of May this year. I want some people to buy me a drink at my favorite bar in Oxford, which is that.
Yeah, of course. We look forward to having you here at the Union. Thanks so much. And for the members who are watching now, I look forward to seeing you at our debate on Thursday. And thanks so much for attending this event.